Hello and welcome back to the Bitcoin Cash podcast. This is episode number 9 following Bitcoin Cash on its rise to global reserve currency. Today is Wednesday, the 10th of March 2021, and today we're going to be talking about Bitcoin forks and adoption in Detroit. For that, I have a resident expert from the Detroit area, Connor. So what do you know about Detroit? What do you know about Bitcoin? Why are you on the podcast?
Sure. I've been a huge proponent for Bitcoin Cash for a while now. When I was younger, I really kind of found an interest in Bitcoin before it became Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash. And then during the fork, I kind of did my research, did my due diligence, and decided to put most of my eggs into Bitcoin. I believed in Bitcoin as more of a tradable value, something that you can use as actual money as opposed to a store value. So I really adopted Bitcoin Cash, and I kind of just held it for a while because there's not very many places here in the city of Detroit where you can spend it. But now my goal is this summer to try and help drive adoption here in the city.
Yeah, so what, do you know what year you were in, you first got involved in Bitcoin then? No, don't remember?
It was probably like the thing, really. I mean, I'd heard about it before. People talking about it, but probably the first actually researching it. And I bought a tiny amount. But yeah, first time I started really getting into it and actually researching.
All right, cool. Yeah, 2016. Just in my head, it helps the timeline, right? Because we have people on this show who they've only just first getting into it now in 2021. Some people from obviously the way early days, 2012 or 2010, which is even earlier than for me, and then for me 2013, and then 2014. I think everybody sees Bitcoin slightly differently based on what time they come to it, right? And I find that very interesting to follow. So I hope the listeners of the show will get a bit of a sense of having that diversity of opinions as to each different phase in Bitcoin's life, as well as different geographies around the world. People have seen it in different ways too. Cool. So yeah, let's crack on with it then. So the first thing, as always, is the price update. Price, the least important thing, but first thing always brought up on the show. How you like that? But we got the 561 USD, so it is actually up this week.
Doing good,
but doing bad against BTC, down below 100 to 1 ratio, which as I talked about last week, personally I'm not really that concerned about, because the utility for BCH just seems to be going up and up, and BTC is just powered by this endless amount of hype over nothing. There's no new merchants, there's no new anything, there's no new, I guess they had a new thing called Taproot, but there's not really grand projects being unveiled, there's not anything. It's just more and more people buying into a fee, a coin with increasing fees, and as the fees get higher, ironically that probably actually drives the price higher as well, because it means there's a lot of Bitcoin you can't move because it's not worth selling it, because it would cost you almost all your coins or all your coins to even send them to an exchange. So kind of interesting. Yeah, the audio cut out here a little bit, but Connor was talking about how he only checks it on the price once a week, or when he's actually using Bitcoin Cash, and how he made a joke that with the fees getting higher and higher on Bitcoin, it might actually be cheaper to physically transport gold than to send digital gold over the internet. Yeah, it's true. You put it on a plane and just ship it to the other side of the world, probably, or just put it in FedEx or something, and it'd probably be quicker too, right? So. Yeah, and it's funny you say that, actually, because there's a lot of great Satoshi quotes, but one of the ones that he has that is in one of the often quoted ones is he says in the early days, is explaining to somebody on the forum about what is Bitcoin, what's the point of it, and everything. And he said, well, imagine that you have something that is exactly the same as gold, except it's boring. It doesn't really conduct electricity that well, and it's just a gray color, so it's not like good to be used in jewelry or anything like that. And it's super boring, and is basically pointless, except the one advantage it has over gold is that you can teleport it anywhere around the world, and that would make a massively amazing form of money, because if it didn't have those other use cases that were sort of like distracting from it, and it was super transportable, then the fact that it had a limited supply and it was recognizable and so on and so forth would be really great. So that is kind of where that sort of digital gold narrative came into it. But like you say, I mean, making it harder to transact with definitely does not make it a better asset in any stretch of the imagination, really. But I guess obviously not everybody agrees with that assessment, even though I think it should be blindingly obvious. But anyway, moving on. We've got the transactions has been still continuing to grow. It's slowed down a little bit, but seems like it's picked up off the plateau. So it's now starting to open up a bit of a noticeable lead here on BTC, which is in its same channel. But as BCH gets consistently to the top of that channel, especially as you zoom out the chart, they get further and further apart, because once you add up several days at once onto a single data point, the BCH line is significantly higher, and I think that's just going to keep going up and up. Definitely, if there's more adoption in Detroit, it will be, right?
Yes, I hope so.
Yeah, we've got plenty of capacity. So it's been funny, because obviously there's been a huge story for BCH supporters that we're doing more transactions than BTC and so on and so forth. And one thing that you might expect is that BTC supporters, it might make them start to rethink their position, that because for the last, let's say, 3 years, they've been able to sit there pretty comfortably and say, look, Bitcoin is doing 300,000 transactions, Bitcoin Cash is doing 20,000 transactions, haha, we were right, this shitcoin, that nobody wants to use or whatever. But then when now there has been all this growth that's happening, now that's not really a viable sort of line of reasoning anymore. So instead, well, they might think, look into that, what's going on here? Why is this suddenly becoming popular or whatever? But they haven't really reflected on it in that way. And in fact, most of the sentiment I've seen has just been, well, this is all spam, and they just think that, I don't know, somebody's running a bot or something to just send around a load of transactions.
Sending one cent.
Yeah, but why? If that was the case, like, why wouldn't I say we, like the BCH community, why wouldn't somebody have just done that way earlier? Like, why did they suddenly start doing it now? And I think also looking at this graph, it looks pretty organic. It's not. It's just slow increases, but it's a bit up, a bit down, and definitely having, rolling along. Okay, it flattened out a little bit, and there's been plenty of news. It's not like it's just in a vacuum. There's been Noise.cash, Read.cash. There's been loads of videos of people at meetups all around the world in different places. There's been, excitement following Elon Musk announcing about Tesla. There's been so many different things. So I think it's pretty short-sighted of them to just dismiss it as, this is not happening, because they won't realize that the snowball is really rolling until it's already too late. But fair enough, that's their narrative. So then there's also this chart, which I've been looking at most of the time as well, which is the USD cent per day. So obviously, while the transactions are now equal, the USD cent isn't quite there yet, but it's moving up. If this sort of trend continues, then Bitcoin Cash is going to catch up at some point. And I really think a lot of people were asking about this on Reddit as well too, which is that, so for Bitcoin Cash, let's say right now it's about 5 billion per day, and then for Bitcoin it can be between about 15 and 30 billion. So it's basically about a 3 to a 6 X multiplier in terms of the amount of coins going around every single day. And when you consider what we were saying before, that it's 100 to 1 price differential, that means BCH is absolutely crushing it in terms of the amount of commerce it is doing relative to the size of the network. Again, you can sort of dismiss that or have a line of angle. Well, maybe it's just a lot of spam, or maybe people are just sending 1 cent and then refunding change back to themselves for $50, and that's like inflating these numbers. But yet again, I look at this graph and it seems pretty legit to me. Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, just my opinion. The viewers can make up their own mind, but I think you've sort of got to take these graphs and integrate them a little bit with your own sense or your own intuition of a real adoption, right? So for the listeners, if they've noticed that, okay, maybe a new store near them has started accepting Bitcoin Cash, or some more of their friends are interested in asking them about it that they weren't 6 months ago, or those kind of things. If you notice those things happening, which I have myself, it might be different for other people, but I have noticed those things happening. It does give me confidence that this is not just like random spam or whatever. So we've got the forks as the topic in today. So kitchen cutlery and Bitcoin. What about those shitty little dessert forks that you have with the Queen or whatever?
Yeah. I can actually the difference is I can buy kitchen cutlery with Bitcoin Cash.
Yeah, well, exactly. You need to be able to purchase your fork, and that is why Bitcoin Cash is the superior currency. Only partly joking. So basically, this is a big topic, and I don't think we're not really going to get into every one of these different forks in huge detail, because every single one had a lot of back and forth, and who said what, and who, blah, blah, blah. They all had their own set of issues, and I'm not even perhaps the best placed person to comment on the intricacies of every single one. And in a lot of ways, it's sort of irrelevant now. But for this, because I had a viewer question about the forks and my opinions and everything, I thought it might be a good topic to walk through, and especially with you saying that you joined Bitcoin shortly before that fork between Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash, and then obviously, like you said, did some research. I thought it would be quite good to talk about. So let's start there. When you were approaching this, when Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash forked on August the 1st, 2017, how aware were you of the controversy and the drama in the lead up? And had you already picked a side, or were you planning to just let it play out, or what was your approach?
Yeah. So I actually hadn't really realized that I wasn't like super engaged in the community. I was on Reddit a lot, but I didn't really initially, after the fork, really pick up on the I knew what Bitcoin Cash versus Bitcoin about it, and then quickly after the fork, I really realized what was going on, and I was listening at the time to
Connor talks about Roger Ver being an influence on him as he was trying to sort out the fact from the fiction in the fork debate, and that he was following it more closely after the fork because it really engaged him in the community as to what the different sides and opinions were, and everybody getting censored on the Bitcoin subreddit, shutting down a lot of free debate.
I wagered most of my money into Bitcoin Cash, so after the fork, of the Bitcoin I had, I sold a majority of it and kept a very small portion of it, just because I like diversifying. But right now, I don't actually own any Bitcoin. I'm purely into Bitcoin Cash as a crypto investment.
Yeah. I guess for me, I was very heavily involved, at least maybe not at the most of anyone in the entire world, but definitely in the lead up to that fork, I was posting a lot on our Bitcoin, in the discussions and all that. Everybody was arguing back and forth. And I definitely had, some very heavily upvoted posts, and some that were, spawned a lot of discussion and stuff like that. And it was absolutely crazy, the levels of censorship that started happening on the subreddit, where it would be hundreds and hundreds of comments would get removed, even though they were literally all on the topic, because the moderator of the forum, who's called Thamos, who nobody has ever met, even though he is the key moderator or in control, nobody had ever met him in person at a Bitcoin meetup or anything, and he just enforced this policy because it was the issue. It was the one thing that the community just wanted and had to talk about, and so it just came up over and over. It would be like every single thread with people flooding in with discussion about it, and so I guess at a certain point he got fed up. But obviously, the more people you banned, it just made it more to a fever pitch of anger and annoyance, and it ended up coming around to be that it got to a fork. But so let's just take a step back here, and for users that are not as familiar with crypto, I want to give a bit of an overview of forks and what it's all about. So in Bitcoin, or in any cryptocurrency in theory, but Bitcoin has the most famous instances of this. There is, because the currency is run as a chain of new transactions being added in groups called blocks, and then that all carries on and everybody agrees this is the chain, this block comes before this block, and this transaction came before this transaction. But if there is a certain amount of disagreement in the community as to what the rules are for those blocks, what the nodes should enforce or not, then they can get to a situation where one group feels so strongly, essentially, about the direction that the currency is going, or that it needs to go, that they will program their nodes to be a different set of rules to the first set, and then the one chain that is going along, each block being added, will split into two, where the history is shared up until the point of the split, and then at the point of the split, each side from that moment on goes its separate ways and can enforce their own sets of rules. And obviously that's at the technical level, but at the meta level, the communities will also start to diverge, where people who believe in one ideology or the other will sell one coin to buy more of the other, or vice versa, or maybe they'll hold both and wait and see what happens. But the communities will start to fracture and have their own discussion, or their own vision, their own development, their own node teams, everything like that, right? And so in one very important thing to know is that I will call this a fork, and a lot of people do, but it does, there's sort of several subcategories in that, right? Which is that in the normal course of Bitcoin mining, there is sometimes forks of just like one block or something along those lines, but it's unintentional, and usually it all sort of comes out in the wash, where those transactions later get included into another block. So that's not an issue, but it does crop up from time to time. And then there are soft forks, which is where, when the chain is going along, if the rules need to be changed for the nodes, that they change the rules in such a way that it's backwards compatible, basically, that the previous nodes can still can still be compatible with the new nodes, and therefore nodes don't need to upgrade. So it doesn't come to a point where things would split off because the rules have been changed and the old nodes and the new nodes differ. Because if the old nodes and the new nodes differ, then it's really important that everybody is prepared to switch onto the new nodes. Otherwise you end up in this chaos of splitting, either intentionally or not, right? And so those soft forks, it sounds kind of like nice, like why wouldn't you do that? But the problem often is that if you want to make certain kinds of changes, you're adding what's called technical debt. You're kind of messing up your code base, or maybe you're making some other compromises in the technology of the system in order to avoid having that fork. And then finally, there's hard forks, which is where either everyone or a subset decides that they want to change one of those key rules, and then if everyone can agree on it, then the currency can all switch over at an agreed time, and it doesn't need to be a traumatic thing. And in fact, Bitcoin had hard forked several times before the Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash split. But then at the point of the Bitcoin Cash split, the two communities sort of diverged, where the Bitcoin Cash community, who obviously split off, they had their philosophy of they don't try and avoid hard forks, like they're happy to hard fork to make upgrades still when necessary and when everybody can agree with it. While the Bitcoin community, BTC, they have sort of decided that pretty much hard forks are evil and that they should never be attempted or anything like that, even if there is broad agreement. Well, I guess now there wouldn't ever be broad agreement because people just don't even appreciate the idea, right? Yeah, so like one other thing is to keep in mind is that what I was saying all about the fork, so technically they don't have to result in a chain split where there is two different currencies that come out of it, because if everybody pretty much agrees, then everybody can just flick over, and then even if there would have been another branch, it just sort of withers off pretty quickly. So some people call it a chain split instead of a fork to sort of distinguish when it was creating two coins and when it wasn't, but I'm just going to call it forks, and I think people it's a nice metaphor, right? People understand it quite intuitively. And the other thing to note is that forks are irreversible. So once you split off into those two different camps, there's no coming back. So it's a very drastic move, which only happens if there is serious contention in the community, because by default, most people want to continue the momentum in the community they've already built. They don't want to switch it up without a very good reason. Like, so do you think then, do you think it was required, like at the time that Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash split off? Were you, like, I know you said you were not necessarily involved in all the details, but were you caught off guard then that it had happened, or?
I wasn't caught off guard that it would happen. I definitely knew it needed to happen for sure. I mean, that is like the most contentious I've ever seen the community ever. I didn't pay attention too much before it happened. But obviously I knew it needed to happen, but I started to pay attention a lot more once it did happen, because I was interested in researching, I didn't, because at the time I wasn't paying attention too much to it, but once I found out, I have two wallets now, and I have two different coins, what's going on here? I need to figure out what both of these are. I really kind of just backtracked and looked at everything that had happened. I was like, wow, there was some intense debate for sure. So yeah, I think, the Bitcoin Cash split was definitely the most needed split that has ever happened.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think there's no, there's obviously a lot of rancor on both sides of this split, where Bitcoin Cash community sort of are annoyed that they had to split off or force a split, because they feel like everybody should have been able to be rationally persuaded without all this censorship and stuff. And then the Bitcoin side, sort of have their narrative, which I think is now even perpetuated a lot more by the people who are new, who were not there at the time of the split and didn't understand all this backstory that, it's a scam or it's a knockoff or something like that, when really they share actually a common ancestry. It's not, it's actually nothing like that. But because of that, both sides have their views.
Yeah.
Yeah. So with the one.
Yeah, it's a real, right now I think it's a.
Go on.
Well, I think it's a huge educational issue right now, because we're getting all these people like, Tesla said they bought Bitcoin, and like all these, what we would consider an institutional investor, buying Bitcoin, and not necessarily buying it because they know what it is. It's just, they just buy it because they think, they think there's support behind it, and there's no education behind like what actually happened and what Bitcoin actually is, and like all the splits that happened. And there's a lot of people that own Bitcoin on like like these trading platforms like Robinhood and stuff, but that don't actually physically own Bitcoin, right? They don't actually own that. So they don't even know what they really have. They're not really aware of the problems within the Bitcoin community. They're not aware of like, as a trader on Robinhood, you're not paying fees. You're not really aware of the insanity that are actual Bitcoin fees, because you're just trading this not real token. So I think there's a huge educational issue right now because of all the new investors coming into this space.
Yeah, and that's the sort of one key point about these forks, is that obviously it's a new field of study, right? Like many things in cryptocurrency, the world is there's not much history. I mean, we have this now, but even this few sets of forks, there's not necessarily a lot of precedent as to how all these things work. There's not academic papers, or there's not research studies, or there's not hundreds of years of history or anything like that. So one thing that has emerged in the different sets of forks is that control of the brand name is quite crucial, right? So Bitcoin obviously proves that, and then the Bitcoin Cash forks that we're going to look at, and also the one other coin that I have an example here of a fork is, and I think probably is the only one besides Bitcoin to have a highly publicized or notable fork, is Ethereum. And since that was that's the second biggest coin, you have to have a community of a certain size before you can even get to the point of having a fork, because it needs to be big enough for there to be a wide spectrum of opinion with a significant enough minority who want to split off. But in every single case, I don't think there's been a single case yet of the minority fork rising up to surpass the majority fork in price yet. Like, so if Bitcoin Cash could do that to Bitcoin, it would be the first time it's ever happened. I think there's a good shot of that in the very long term, but it's there's no precedent for that, and it's very important for listeners to understand and reflect on that point.
Yeah, it's an uphill battle for sure.
Yeah, because it just goes to show is that most people are not necessarily as invested. They don't know all about it, and they follow the brand name. People follow brands that they trust or that they understand, especially in cryptocurrency with a first of its kind type of thing. And so if people don't know all the details, that's obviously where they're naturally going to go, and hopefully at some point they can get a more nuanced understanding. But it's not necessarily the case, especially when the side that ends up with the brand, which again nobody really decides who does that. It sort of comes down to the communities at the time battling over it, and as to influential leaders, and if one side feels like they want to sort of maybe rebrand, or I mean the Bitcoin Cash community, they sort of got pushed off the brand, unfortunately, I would say. But it was basically, the situation was so dire that they were prepared to take that loss in order to be able to have a fork in the first place. So I think it was overall a good thing. But and as I've discussed in the past, I think the new Bitcoin Cash branding, I actually kind of like it now that I've been with it for a while. But it was undoubtedly a loss on that front. And so if Bitcoin Cash can overtake Bitcoin, well, Bitcoin will have no excuses, because it had every advantage. So one thing, I mean, we've already talked about this a little bit, all the details of this fork, but essentially one thing to point out here is, like I was talking about, there was censorship, the community leaders were arguing over about it. It was about the 1 megabyte block size limit, which has now led to huge fees on BTC and low fees on BCH despite similar transaction volume. A lot of arguing about what is the real Bitcoin. And one thing to also note is that in the lead up to the fork, there was a certain conference called the Hong Kong Agreement came out of this conference, and then there was a later one in New York called the New York Agreement, both of which fell apart. But there were these conferences where prominent Bitcoin community members all met up, first in Asia and then in America, to try and discuss all of this, because as I explained, before, it is a situation of last resort. And so in those scenarios, in the lead up, there's always discussion. People are trying to find a compromise or something that can get everybody on board, and there's so many people involved, and nobody is in charge, right? That's the whole point of a decentralized governance model, where there is not somebody who can make the call of yes or no, we're gonna hard fork, right? So the miners are involved, the nodes developers are involved, the community is involved with all their opinions, and big investors are involved, businesses are involved because they might have to support one or both forks or to put in their opinions, So, and there's not even really a clear idea of who should be significantly in the discussion and who isn't. Everybody's in the discussion to whatever extent they want to be, right? So, but these two attempts at coming to an agreement in a sort of United Nations type of approach both failed, basically, and that was why the fork happened. And I think that has also set the scene for the other forks that we're going to look at, where in those cases there have often been attempts to sort of reconcile and have meetings and it usually doesn't work. Basically, people dig in their heels. So yeah, I don't know. Did you follow much of that? I don't know if you have any memories of those agreements, or again, you might have been off your radar at that time.
It was off the radar for me. Yeah. I'm not very aware of these, actually.
Yeah.
You're educating me.
Yeah. Well, I'm good. But I still am not the best, person. Like, somebody who was actually there would be the best to talk about what went down, And the other thing is that when these kind of meetings happening, then the rest of the community are sort of like, well, why aren't we involved? I don't know necessarily if they're always if they stream it live and they have Q&A, or whether they just do it and they don't want to have 1,000 million people all putting in their opinions who are not there to really discuss properly, and are trolling the chat and whatever. So every scenario plays out differently with that. So basically, in the end, Bitcoin Cash split off and then sort of devolved into its own internal battles, effectively, because it was quite interesting. I think again, I sort of got quite disillusioned after the fork, and I was not heavily involved. I was been watching Bitcoin Cash casually, but I was not heavily involved enough to know all the details of this. But essentially, this guy Craig Wright, who I've talked about on the show before, who claimed to be Satoshi effectively fraudulently, he sort of had his own vision for what he thought the Bitcoin Cash split should be doing, and a lot of people disagreed with that, and so then it was more infighting and more back and forth about everything, and that's definitely a challenge of being on the minority side of the fork, where if you are on the minority side, you have to re-establish that vision. It's both an opportunity and a crisis to pick a new direction and kind of rally everyone around that, but it's obviously going to be a bit of a disparate community of people who are dissatisfied with the main branch, but who might not necessarily even be that united in what they think people should do instead. Did you I don't know, how involved were you in these subsequent later battles?
Satoshi, I thought that was pretty laughable. Craig Wright's whole thing was just like, I don't know. And what you're talking about, it's really, that was like, I think probably like the toughest time for Bitcoin Cash when all this split was happening, because it's like, we're already we already have less support and less backing behind us, and then we're just gonna keep arguing and like deviate the community even more, split across even more. So it was definitely painful, but it was kind of I thought it was just ridiculous, the SB split.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, people being in those minority fork positions or whatever. Again, they sort of tried to have another conference, which was called the Bangkok Miners Summit 2018, and you can have a look. There's a really good interview with Craig Wright that Hayden Otto did. It's linked here on the slides, so people can check that out. But basically, Bitcoin Cash was sort of, we're going to be peer-to-peer electronic cash, and I think the idea of Bitcoin SV or Satoshi Vision was that they wanted to raise the block size even more. So Bitcoin Cash obviously had raised it. That was the whole point of splitting off from Bitcoin, but then Bitcoin Satoshi Vision wanted to raise it even more, and they also wanted, as far as I know, to add in the ability to put different kinds of data in the blockchain. So now they have a lot of transactions and a lot of things going on where people, it's sort of almost like a decentralized kind of Dropbox or something like that, where people can be uploading huge gigabytes of files or whatever directly into the blockchain, which is either a great alternative use case if you ask them, or if you ask me, it's probably just kind of screwing up the system, because you want to have transaction data, because that's the whole point of having peer-to-peer cash. But if you put too much other junk in there, you sort of spoil the broth for transactions, in my mind. So yeah, I don't know. Is that an accurate characterization? Is that how it was?
I think that's pretty accurate. I think what Craig was trying to do was basically with the coin try and recreate the internet, right? He was trying to make something that was the entire internet again.
Yeah, the whole like platform of services and different data and whatever. I don't know. It seemed a bit much to me. But then after they split off, like I mean, Craig is Australian. You know, it's funny to be like Craig he's Australian, and so is Hayden. And I think you can almost see that. And obviously, I'm Australian too, right? So I just recommend people to watch this video. But you can see a little bit of the attitude there by Hayden in how he's sort of trying to. He's not confrontational or anything like that, but you can feel the skepticism that he has about Craig's points, but in a very Australian way. So just personally, I found that quite funny. So anyway, at a certain point, BSV, this conference yet again failed, and BSV split off, so they went their own way. And then there was one more fork where later down the line, again, Bitcoin Cash devolved into internal chaos with this guy, Amaury Séchere, who he was the one that actually made the first original Bitcoin Cash fork off of Bitcoin. So props to him for that. Thanks Amaury. He obviously did a great job. He did a lot of work and everything. But he had this idea that he wanted to add what he called the IFP, which is an infrastructure funding proposal, which is an 8% tax on the Bitcoin miners, effectively. And that money was going to go to pretty much to him, to his organization, so that they could code more of the software for Bitcoin Cash. And I mean, it's not entirely without justification that he had the sort of reasoning that in a open source economy like this, you need to have a strong central infrastructure. But at the moment, there's not really necessarily any funding of it. It's all just done by volunteers or voluntary donations from perhaps like businesses in the scene, who obviously their business relies on the infrastructure, so they want to donate to it and keep it running, right? But in that scenario, he was worried that there was not enough money going to those different developers, particularly himself and his group of developers. So he wanted to add this tax, but it was quite unpopular, I think, because there's a lot of reasons. Obviously, it was unpopular because he obviously seemed to benefit from it directly himself, and also because in a decentralized economy, even if it's not ideal, it does seem to work that there are nodes and people do development and there are donations and stuff like that. So if you had a central point where the money was going to, it's sort of like who was in control of who got that money and who decided what it should be spent on. And it just raised all these questions that just defeated the whole point of a volunteer, decentralized, leaderless type of movement, right? Connor talks about people disagreeing about the need to add a tax onto the miner, and that changing the philosophy of the coin from an anarchist kind of point of view to a more communist philosophy. Yeah, a change in political philosophy.
First change in political philosophy.
Yeah. So I also wasn't particularly involved in this, but I was very intrigued because Maurice Hachette, the main guy, he has had on his Twitter profile for a long time. He's self-described as the benevolent dictator of Bitcoin ABC, and to me that always struck me as kind of crazy, because why would the whole point of this whole Bitcoin and the whole libertarian type of angle and everything, anarchy, all of that, is that there is not leaders or any hierarchy like that. So saying that yourself, I guess he's sort of partly, it's a bit tongue-in-cheek, but even still it's a little bit in poor taste to sort of be, I'm the benevolent dictator, and then as a result, it turned out to be maybe not so benevolent, because he started trying to redirect the money to himself. And in fact, this fork and the aftermath, where he kind of quit the community a bit and the community decided that they didn't want to go in that direction, this was actually what convinced me to get back involved, because in large part because up to this point, I was just seeing this benevolent dictator stuff, and the community was just in so much turmoil. And even though I had no faith in BTC, Bitcoin, I thought Bitcoin Cash might be where something good could come of it. Just between Craig Wright and then this Maurice Hachette and just all the chaos and all the infighting and bickering, there just was not a strong core and vision. And even though it took a couple of years and those elements slowly got filtered out one way or another, it has been, I think, a good thing for the community. And once it was gone, it convinced me, and I would hesitate to guess a few other of the sort of old school Bitcoiners are or have been or will be attracted back as a result of now having refocused on that core mission of peer-to-peer electronic cash. Is that a vibe that you feel, or?
100%. Yeah, I can agree. I was pretty out of the community for a while, pretty dead, and post fork I didn't really pay attention to it too much until probably last year I started really getting back into it and doing research.
Yeah, so that community vibe and leadership is very important. So this Bitcoin Cash ABC is now basically dead, as far as I'm aware. They're not really listed on any exchanges. I don't know if they have necessarily any wallets or anything. So unlike Satoshi's vision, they didn't really create enough momentum necessarily to carry on. It might crop up out of the blue somewhere, but at this point, I think they've kind of lost their momentum. And what did also come out of it is that the Bitcoin Cash community made Flipstarter, which was the decentralized version of Kickstarter, and to address exactly these concerns about economic funding and how would things happen, right? So the community did actually move to address it. They just found their own solutions rather than this kind of taxing the miners scheme. So really that was quite interesting, I think. So yeah, okay, so if we've moved on, so I also want to quickly touch on this, which is a bit of a tangent really, but in all of this, it's very easy to sort of get lost in this big mess of all these different Bitcoins. And I wanted to call out, there's this other one called Wrapped Bitcoin, or Wrapped BTC, which you might see on CoinMarketCap, or if you're researching the space for the listeners or anything. But that is not a fork of any version of Bitcoin, actually. This is a completely different thing, which is, it's a form of Bitcoin integration with Ethereum, where people can, through these sort of trusted parties, so there's a bit of an issue there about the decentralization, but you can basically lock up somehow or burn, destroy effectively your Bitcoins, and then be given like replacement Bitcoins, except on Ethereum. And that means you can use Ethereum smart contracts and Ethereum things to interact with it, and then there's also some sort of mechanism for sending it back onto the main Bitcoin. So this is just a completely different thing, but with the branding, it might be easier to think of it that it is one of these forks. So it's not, it's completely different. But yeah, that's just a heads up for the community. So yeah, I don't know if you know anything about Wrapped Bitcoin or... No?
No, not too much.
Yeah, okay, well there you go. So then that's it. It's definitely out of the picture.
Yeah.
That really just says it all. But I thought it would be worth just giving a heads up to the listeners in case they come across this, because yeah, obviously the branding and stuff's quite confusing. All right, so the final little fork that I want to talk about here is the one non-Bitcoin fork that has been relevant in cryptocurrency history, I'd say, which was Ethereum, which split into Ethereum Classic. And much like Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash, Ethereum is now dominating. It's now $1,850 to Ethereum Classic, which is about $12.30. So it's about 150 to 1. But the reason for their split was completely different, which was that the smart contracts on Ethereum allowed everybody to pour in all this money into a contract, which they called the DAO, the Distributed Autonomous Organization, and a lot of people did, and there was about, I think it was like 50 million or something like that, which in the scale of crypto now even seems a bit minor, but at the time it was massive. It was a huge amount of money in the scene at the time, and they poured all their cash into this contract, and then somebody found a hack, an exploit, and they just drained all the money to themselves. But I think the rules of the hack was that they couldn't spend it for, I think, 28 days. Or they couldn't necessarily do anything with it straight away. So the community in Ethereum then devolved into chaos as everybody tried to figure out what to do about this. And essentially what Ethereum decided to do with, and what Ethereum Classic disagreed about, was that they rolled back. They put out the word to everybody, and they said, all right, this is a bit of a mess. Why don't we travel back in time to before this was hacked, and we'll reimburse all the shareholders of the DAO, and we'll carry on, and we won't do this experiment again because it didn't work. And that was, I guess, good because it reimbursed the shareholders who got hacked, but it was bad because it sort of defeats the point of a unreversible currency if it can be easily reversed or changed back at any moment by somebody who just happens to think that's a good idea, in this case being sort of the prominent Ethereum members, because it raises a lot of concerns about the censoring of transactions and so on and so forth. So Ethereum Classic said, look, we just want to carry on. We don't think anybody should be able to just arbitrarily change up what was already in the blockchain, and so they split off. And again, with the minority branding, they've had a tough time of it, even though philosophically speaking, they're probably actually in the right. So I think that's just an interesting case to look at. Do you have any thoughts about this fork?
Yeah, I think that's super interesting. I mean, I've heard of it, but I never knew why they split. That's pretty. So, do you know when did this happen? I know this was pretty early because this was probably before I even got into this space. I'm guessing because I remember seeing it on exchanges when I was like investigating. Do you know when this like happened?
Yeah, I think, well, we can check, but I think it was in maybe late 2015. Let me see here, but Ethereum Classic split. I should have put it on the slides basically, but I think yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so it's kind of
It was okay. Now, if maybe my internet's going to be janky, but I think it was at about that time, which was still very early in the life cycle because Ethereum is much younger than Bitcoin, right? So it was still quite new in that sense, and obviously because the whole idea of smart contracts and so on and so forth was completely new and stuff, it was quite inevitable that something like this would happen. I've just got this one quote highlighted here from Gavin Wood, who was involved in Ethereum, and he said, "This was the single most important moment in cryptocurrency history since the birth of Bitcoin." And for the record, I think that is complete rubbish. There is a lot of things that rank higher than this, like the founding of the Silk Road, or there's the Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash split, for instance, or even like the founding of Ethereum is perhaps another one. So I think that's complete nonsense. I think that's very self-aggrandizing to have that view, but it was still quite an important moment, and it did sort of set the groundwork, and it's still an interesting case study of how forks can sort of play out. Okay, cool. So now onto your special subject, adoption in Detroit. So as you mentioned at the start, you're working on a flip starter and all that to do adoption of merchants in Detroit to maybe look at solving some of the problems there. So give me the spiel. How did this all come about, and what's the game plan?
I've been a holder basically of Bitcoin Cash for a while now, and I'm always on the subreddit. I'm seeing all these people in different places being able to use their Bitcoin Cash and that kind of stuff, and like really a lot of people are doing a really good job. Really getting into particular stuff, and I was thinking about where I live in Detroit, where there basically is no ecosystem for Bitcoin Cash. I think there's like 2 or 3 Bitcoin ATMs in this entire city. There's really not anything as far as Bitcoin Cash goes at all. There's no meetups. There's literally no infrastructure as far as Bitcoin Cash or Bitcoin goes here in the city of Detroit. And so what I really want to try and do is start scratching the surface of creating adoption in Detroit. Be a really good place for Bitcoin Cash, just because it's a relatively impoverished area, right? So in the grand scheme of the United States, Detroit is, I think, number 2, or maybe even number 1 as the highest poverty rate in the major city. It's the only major city to ever declare bankruptcy. And there's a really large population of people here that are indominant, which means they don't even have money, right? So there's a really big opportunity here for Cash, because the issues here is that the city likes the city to run. Unfortunately, things happen here where really what we're doing is we're punishing poor people for being poor. So every block there's a check casher, and you need to get paid for work that you did last month.
Yeah, so basically with the problems in Detroit. So you're saying there's issues with the check cashing, right? That certain people are too poor and they're already having to pay huge fees for their money, right?
Yeah, so the check cashing service basically works like, people get paid, right? You work, you do work, you go to work, you put in your hours, and then normally what happens is, you get paid for that work 1 to 2 weeks after you do that work. Most people get paid like bi-weekly, right? So they get paid for work they did like 2 weeks ago. And some people, what they're in poverty, they're living, paycheck to paycheck, and sometimes midway through that pay period, they're running out of money, right? So they need to get, as soon as they get paid, they need to get their check cashed like immediately, because they don't have time to wait to go to the bank and have the 3-day processing fee go through, which takes some time. But what check cashers do, and they're like literally everywhere in Detroit and everywhere in like the Metro Detroit area, is basically they charge you a fee, and it basically allows you to get your money quicker. But that's something that Bitcoin Cash can really help with, because it's an instantaneous transaction with very low fees. Imagine clocking in 8 hours a day, and by the end of the day, the money that you worked that day is already in your bank account. Instead of having to wait, doing week work and then waiting 2 weeks to get paid. A lot of these, like I said, a lot of people living paycheck to paycheck, and if their car breaks down on the second week before their pay period, they're kind of screwed. So, and then they end up they get behind, and like this just creates a vicious cycle of them staying behind, right?
Yeah.
And basically, the problem is that you have to pay. Poor people have to pay more. Like it's just ridiculous how if you're poor, right, you end up spending more money. Like it costs more to be poor than it does to be rich.
Yeah, I mean that's the story of the world, right? It costs to be poor, exactly.
Yeah, so it's a huge problem here in Detroit, and there's many more problems here that can hopefully be solved by Bitcoin Cash. Not only that, just like a lot of predatory lending practices. People needing to get loans, and they don't have the bank won't qualify them for a loan because they don't have good enough income or whatever, and they have to go to a private lender and end up like taking out crazy amounts of credit card debt and crazy amounts of credit card loans, and paying like 14, 15, 16, up to 30% on some of these loans, which is just like abysmal. So it's really something that is holding a lot of poor people back, especially in the city of Detroit. And I was also talking about home ownership. So it's basically impossible to, even if you're middle class, it's almost impossible to own a house here in the city of Detroit, just because banks won't lend on any houses here. They basically see it as too big of a risk, because Detroit is not a favorable market. It's not a great place for most people. Most banks don't think it's a great place for you to live. They don't think it's a place where there was a lot of foreclosures here in 2008 when the financial crisis happened. So it really scared a lot of banks away from doing a lot of mortgages and lending, which basically means if you want to buy a house here, you have to pay cash. You have to have the cash in hand, and you can't like, as a person, if you're making even $50,000, which isn't even considered the poverty rate here, making $50,000 a year, there's no chance you're going to pull out 50 grand in cash to buy a house. So that's a huge problem as well, because a lot of people are stuck renting with like really crappy landlords. People that don't have the money are just buying up these houses for cash and renting them to people, and really not taking care of these properties, and just letting them like go into despair, and people are living in like really crappy housing that's not well taken care of. And even to the point where there are foreclosure auctions here. So when your house goes into foreclosure and you stop making the payments, the bank puts your house up for auction, and these people will these people with cash will basically buy your house out from under you while you're living in it, and then they'll say, hey, you can stay, but you got to pay me X amount of dollars in rent. And either these people become homeless, or they end up getting forced to pay rent, which is more expensive than even their mortgage was in the first place. So it's kind of like a lose-lose situation, where a lot of, just in general, like a lot of poor people getting screwed over here.
Damn. Yeah, I mean, I've never been to Detroit. I just know it as being famous by Eminem. Has he's definitely on the scene there, or he talks about it quite a lot, right? Is he from Detroit? Is that or is he just spent? Yeah.
No, he's from Detroit. He's from like the 8 Mile area.
That's
which
right.
Is like, the most northern part of Detroit.
Yeah. So I mean, obviously, you're in the struggle for a lot of people in Detroit. So that you're right. I think that it could be a great opportunity for Bitcoin Cash. I mean, I sort of see it as it is a bit of a double-edged sword often in these scenarios, because people who are in extreme financial hardship, and anybody who's been in this situation knows, is that on one hand you're maybe more willing to take risks, or you're sort of clutching at straws, so you're going to be more open-minded to a different way of doing things, or swapping it up, or whatever. But at the same time as that, you're also riding pretty close to the lightning in those scenarios, and you're not necessarily willing to be taking chances in some aspects, because you're like, look, I can't afford to, literally and figuratively. You probably don't have a safety net, and things are already falling apart, and you're already trying to put out one fire after another just in quick succession. So getting around to, let me just look at this experimental technology or anything like that is not necessarily going to be top of your mind to sit and have a look at.
I completely agree. It's definitely going to be really hard, but it's definitely an opportunity to create more economic equality here, and more, hopefully, more just like financial literacy, as far as just like knowing what to do with your money. But yeah, it's definitely a challenge, and the first step to tackling that challenge is just education, first of all, and just awareness. So before I go and try and get a bunch of stores and merchants to try and accept Bitcoin Cash, that kind of stuff, there just needs to be a general education around here about what that is, and we need to start doing meetups and getting the community more involved with that, because it's kind of a useless thing to do, to onboard, get like 20 people in like restaurants and grocery stores and stuff to accept Bitcoin Cash if no one actually uses it here or even has it. They're just gonna, they'll be like, oh cool, yeah, I'll accept that. If I convince them to do that, they'll be excited about it, and they'll say they'll accept it. Then they're gonna forget about it, because no one's gonna come up to them and be like, yeah, can I pay with Bitcoin Cash?
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, well, I don't know. That's one of the classic problems, I suppose, of even with Bitcoin Cash's insane growth worldwide. It has historically always struggled, and maybe there will be a tipping point at which point it will just take over completely. But historically, the growth has suffered from it being a two-sided market, right? There's less incentive for somebody to get some if there's no way they can spend it, and there's less incentive for some merchant to accept it if there's nobody to spend. And so it's sort of slowly just building up this population, and some online stores have maybe been able to get to that breaking point faster. But in any local geographic area, especially somewhere like Detroit, where there's already a lot of issues and things on people's minds, it's definitely a challenge you set yourself, I think.
Yeah, it definitely will be. I think it's definitely an exponential thing. So there's places, once you see these examples of places, and you sent me those videos about that. I forgot who it was.
Hayden
but anyway,
in North Queensland.
Hayden, yeah, and he's done a great job over there. And really, I think it's just an exponential thing. Like once you get the ball rolling, it really starts to go, and you start to like see like more mass adoption. But it's really getting those first couple footsteps, and that's going to be really difficult here.
Yeah. So what's your initial game plan? I saw you've done you did a 1.5 video. I don't know if you've done number 2 yet, but you just
number 2 will be coming out this weekend.
Okay.
So,
all right.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to
that. Cool. So the initial game plan is just I'm going to be trying to create content around Bitcoin Cash this summer, and just get the word out about it, and also to try and just drive overall like knowledge of it. So the first thing I really want to do is just start doing meetups, and just get the ball rolling and try and get a feel for what the community is here, because there really isn't. I have no knowledge of anyone else in the city that like knows too much about Bitcoin Cash. Like through my university, I haven't really met anyone who's like been passionate about Bitcoin or Bitcoin Cash. I mean, I've met people who have like talked about Bitcoin and stuff like that, but like no one who's like actively invested in it or anything like that. So I think it's definitely the first step towards this is just getting a feel for what the community is, and like if I can organize a couple of people who are passionate about it here, and just start like doing some weekly meetups and getting a game plan going to, hopefully get a couple merchants to accept it. Then we can use those merchants as like destinations for those meetups, and then kind of create a master plan of how we can get all these people who are in a not so good financial situation to be able to boost their financial situation by lowering their fees, like basically making sure that they don't have to pay check cashing fees or like stupid stuff like that they shouldn't have to pay just because they're poor, and try and getting Bitcoin Cash and education to that.
Yeah. I mean, it's a good plan, right? And I think it's going to, like you say, the hardest yards are those initial ones to build some momentum, and in any area it's quite important to find sort of allies is the word I'm going to use, but it might be, and it's different for every area, right? So I'm for sure not the expert on this, right? But in a community, it might be different from place to place, right? But there might be like a community center, for instance, or a local business person who already likes Bitcoin or something, but you just don't know, or you haven't found onto them or something. So hopefully in time, as you start to sort of advertise or get the word out there, you'll stumble across that sort of seed of the community that you can then start building around, because definitely there's no need to reinvent the wheel in terms of people's ability to connect and meet each other and stuff like that. I mean, now with the pandemic, it's a bit messed up, but even that aside, there are already existing networks for things, and it's about, you could grow a second network off that first one, but that needs to have a very strong attachment point to something that resonates with that community, or somebody who's already well respected there who can lend some weight to it or see the potential or that kind of thing. So it'll be very interesting to follow your progress in that regard.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. All right. Well, I don't know how much more time you've got. Like I've got a bunch more questions about Detroit if you want to.
I'm ready to answer them.
All right.
I'm ready to answer them.
Okay. All right. So let's say in this scenario where you've identified this kind of need, and then you went to Flipstarter. So on my previous show had Jonas, who he did a Flipstarter to fund making a payment processor, and then you've sort of done the same thing. So tell us a bit about your campaign, how you found that. Like, I think it's quite hard to use. Personally, I actually haven't used Flipstarter. What was that process like?
Well, I'm by no means the most technologically affluent person. When it comes to technical stuff, and Bitcoin Cash and like Bitcoin in general, I'm pretty clueless about like the development side and how developers do anything. So I'm not too technologically advanced whatsoever. But I do know a couple of things, and there were definitely some challenges and problems when creating a flip starter. But I think it's somewhat straightforward. There are definitely a couple of frustrating bits that just like little things that kind of annoy you. But overall, it didn't really take me too long to do it. I mean, I do have experience like building websites and stuff like that, but it's not really the same. The main challenge of it is figuring out how to use like the Flipstarter thing. When you go to set it up, is pretty intuitive, and they have all the dialog boxes where you're supposed to plug your stuff in. But they basically make you use this thing called DigitalOcean, which is basically your hosting for it, like it's your server hosting, and figuring that out can be a little bit difficult if you're not technologically advanced. And I know if you do want to start a flip starter and you like have no, and you don't even want to deal with it, you're just like, I don't know what he's talking about,
Yeah.
And like what's an IP address kind of stuff. There are people out in the community that will set you up one. It doesn't cost that much if you like pay them like a couple $100. They'll set one up for you. I know. I think that's how Mark Falzone did his. He just paid someone. I think they charged like $150 to set him one up. So even if that looks a little daunting to you, it's still 100% doable.
Yeah. Cool. That's great. So did you, and your Flipstarter, has it been funded now? Or are you locked in?
We have like 10 days left, I believe, and I don't know. I've not been completely funded yet. I know that. We're about 40% of the way there right now.
All right. Well, hopefully the word can get out there a bit to my small little audience with this episode, and I'll make sure we put a link in the description and stuff, so people can chip into that as well. And so then, okay, well, maybe to wrap up, then let's just talk about something a little bit of a different topic, which is on this podcast. I really I'm trying to get a good spread of people from the community and everything, like I mentioned before, and I put quite a lot of weight personally on not so much the stats, even though that's what we look at the start of each show, because that's very objective and it's easy to follow week to week. But personally, I put quite a lot of weight on when I hear people around me talking about Bitcoin Cash, or I see the community comes up with a really cool new ad or a new initiative, or like these kind of projects that you're doing. To me, that's real. Those kind of real things, which are not necessarily what you might encounter if you just come onto a forum and you just start bashing away and it's all arguing about stuff that's all in the clouds, right? It's quite removed from the actual day-to-day of, if you're involved in Bitcoin Cash, and you have a friend and you trade with them for a beer or like a bus ticket or whatever, that kind of interaction. So yeah, I just wanted to get your thoughts on how you think the community is at the moment. Are you optimistic? I mean, obviously you like Bitcoin Cash, but is it trending up, or do you think there's one particular area, let's say outside local adoption in Detroit, you've got that on lock, but in the community generally, if you were going to give some feedback to the community, is there some area that you think we need to focus more on or less on, or anything that's lacking, or anything that you like and think should be encouraged? Like, just speak to the community a bit.
Yeah. I'm really enjoying the community right now, especially on Reddit. I know there's a great amount of positivity going on there. So I'm really excited for the future of Bitcoin Cash and what's going on. I know there's a lot of other people running some really great flip starters and like other really great projects going on, which is like really exciting. Something that you don't really see on any other platform besides Bitcoin Cash is the community involvement is just astonishing here, which is something that I enjoy a lot. But yeah, I'm genuinely really optimistic about the future of Bitcoin Cash. There definitely will be some hurdles and stuff that we have to go over to get to hopefully what is mass adoption. But at the community at the moment, there's just a lot of positivity going on, and there's a lot of great, it's very, everyone's very reachable, you know. You if you want to, let's say you want to talk to like a CEO of a company, right? If you're like, oh, I want, like here in Detroit, we got General Motors and Ford. You're not gonna, who even knows how to talk to the CEO or the COO or anyone at Ford or General Motors to voice your opinion on how the company's going, right? As an employee, but as an investor, and this is an analogy. You can say like I'm technically an employee for Bitcoin Cash as a user of it,
Yeah.
right? So, and I think it's really cool how reachable some of these people are. Like Roger Ver being so active in the community and just talking to like everyday people like me on Reddit, and just and making it seem like you're like you're down to like discuss anything, and like no one's above you and no one's beneath you, right? That kind of mindset. And just like I've had it like with this flip starter in general. I've DM'd on Twitter and talked to a couple of people who have either successfully done a flip starter or just like larger influencers like George Donnelly that are in the Bitcoin Cash space that are like pushing for adoption, and they've just like given me like really great, just genuine feedback, which is like something that's just super cool. I think that those people are even like reachable.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, and I think it does sort of come to that philosophy of Bitcoin Cash, which I hope the listeners can agree or appreciate or be a part of, which is that it is effectively quite a flat structure where that's why we were talking about with the forks. When they happen, it is quite chaotic because nobody's in charge and nobody's the one who can say yes or no, right? The miners, obviously, they have a bit of an influence, and among them, there's sort of some who are more influential in the mining pools and who isn't, and then in the businesses, there's certain businesses that might have strong opinions, and then there's people who are well known for one reason or another, or people who are big investors, or people who are the developers, and they have certain angles on things that they think need change or working out or whatever, and it all sort of comes together as a voluntary project, but it only works as well as everybody is collectively willing to put into it, really. And so that's hopefully something that we can inspire, and I think it is also good, that people support members of the community such as yourself who are proactive like that. We should all try and be in that same vein and find a little niche that we can carve out in the world with Bitcoin Cash, because that ultimately benefits everyone, right? And that is another really great thing about it, I think, which is that you can work on it in Detroit and somebody else can work on it somewhere else, like Hayden in North Queensland, and all those things, they all play into each other because there's always the chance that somebody goes from one to another, and then that's just the community operating into itself. And especially with the internet, stores can obviously sell online to the world once they're at a certain point, or just the general awareness and branding spreads around as a result of everyone's efforts. So it's a pretty cool phenomenon to be a part of, I think.
I completely agree.
All right, cool. Well, I think we might wrap it up there then. That's a good message to the community, stay decentralized, stay non-hierarchical, right, with everybody being reachable. So as always, just thank you very much to the donators to the show. We've had quite a few recently, actually, so it's been really great. I appreciate the support of everybody. Just the same as you, you know, these donations just come in pseudonymously. You don't know who it is or anything like that, but it is really appreciated, and it just makes me, you know, feel confirmed that I'm doing work that people value, or content that they find useful. The slides and resources are at www.bitcoincashpodcast.com. So for all the links and everything in the show, or if people who are listening to the audio, if they want to check out the slides or the videos, they're all up there as well too. And that's really it for me. I have one final shout out, which is to my mum, who I think this week she subscribed on Apple Podcast. She told me that she had listened to a little bits of it, but then said, because it wasn't on Apple Podcast initially, you know, she couldn't subscribe, but now she's subscribed, and if she made it all the way through to the end of the episode, well done, Mum. I know it was a long one, but hopefully you made it through. Is there anything you want to shout out? Where can people get in contact with you? And we'll put the Flipstarter in the description.
Yeah, so my Flipstarter will be in the description. There's contact info on my Flipstarter site, and links to my Twitter account and my website as well. You can follow me on Twitter at Connor Woodward if you want to reach out to me. That's probably the easiest way. DM me if you want. But yeah.
All right, nice. And so anybody who is in the Detroit area, or who knows, maybe in the community at large, maybe somebody's not in Detroit, but they know someone who knows someone who's in Detroit, and you can get a bit of link up there. You know, that's a huge amount of value that people can provide to each other, is making those connections, because that's how business operates, right? That's how you get things done. It's not what you know, it's who you know. So yeah, maybe we can get a little bit of that vibe going. So yeah, thanks to everyone for listening, and until next time.
He pulled out his laptop and bring up the site, looked at me and said, this will change your whole life. Then he started explaining the basics to me. The miners make money by taking a fee every time a transaction is made and complete, and they work every minute and day of the week. A guy named Satoshi created this all. He's the mastermind of it, the brain and the balls. There's a lot more to say, but before I begin, just tell me right now if you're out or you're in.